There is a quiet terror that settles in when you realize you have been alive for years, maybe even decades, and still do not quite feel like you have begun. The days blur into each other. Your dreams feel like visitors you forgot to answer the door for. And somewhere deep in your chest, beneath the noise of daily survival, there's a whisper asking, "Is this it?" This question has haunted more lives than we care to admit. It is not loud or dramatic. It rarely comes with a breakdown or a big life crisis. Often, it shows up in the small moments. Scrolling mindlessly through your phone, staring blankly at a computer screen, feeling oddly empty after achieving something you thought would make you feel whole. You are not doing anything wrong, exactly. But something vital, something essential, is slipping through your fingers. Carl Jung, one of the founding minds of modern psychology, saw this not as a minor issue but as a central crisis of the human soul. To him, the tragedy was not that people failed to become rich or famous or respected. The real tragedy was that people failed to become themselves. They drifted. They conformed. They filled their lives with noise instead of meaning. In Jung's words, the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent. But what if that child grows up and carries the same burden forward, never asking, never daring, never becoming? This is not a new problem. Long before psychology had a name, ancient voices cried out with the same longing. The Stoics warned of spending life as if you had another one in the bank. The Sufis wrote poetry about the sleepwalkers of the world, people alive but not awake. Even in ancient India, the Bhagavad Gita urged one to fulfill their inner calling, their dharma, rather than mimicking someone else's path. Wasting one's life is not a modern malaise, it is a human one. But here is the strange thing. We live in a time of endless possibilities, with more information, freedom, and choice than ever. And yet the feeling of being lost, of wasting life, may be stronger now than in any generation before us. We fill our lives with tasks, but not necessarily meaning. We confuse motion with progress. We exhaust ourselves staying busy, and then wonder why our soul still feels malnourished. In this exploration, we will walk through the history, the psychology, and the emotional weight of this crisis of purpose. We will sit with Carl Jung's insights, ancient wisdom, and modern science, and ask not just how to stop wasting life, but how to start truly living it. This is not about fixing yourself. This is about remembering yourself, the self that existed before the world told you who to be. To understand what it means to waste a life, we first have to ask, what is life meant to be? That question sounds overwhelming, even impossible. But it has been asked by every generation, every culture, in every language. Wasting one's life is not about failure in the traditional sense. You can have a stable job, a respectable reputation, a full calendar, and still feel as if you are watching your life from behind glass. What we call wasting is often not visible from the outside. It is internal, a kind of spiritual drift, a forgetting of one's own essence, a life shaped by reaction, not intention. Carl Jung believed that every person has a self, a deep core beyond the mask we wear in society. But most people spend their lives living from the surface, what Jung called the persona. The persona is useful. It helps us fit in, play roles, survive. But if we identify too strongly with it, we begin to live someone else's script. And so we pass through life never touching our depths. In Jungian terms, the unlived life, the potential, the passion, the true path, remains buried in the unconscious, haunting us in dreams, projections, addictions, and restlessness. This is not a uniquely modern discovery. Ancient civilizations wrestled with the same concern, though in different language. In ancient Greece, the concept of arete, meaning excellence or the fulfillment of purpose, was central to a meaningful life. To waste one's potential was to betray one's daemon, a kind of inner spirit or calling. Socrates famously declared that the unexamined life is not worth living. He did not mean that life must be filled with constant analysis, but that a life lived without reflection, without alignment to inner truth, was hollow. In the East, similar ideas emerged in different symbols. The Bhagavad Gita speaks of swadharma, one's personal duty or nature. Arjuna, the warrior prince, is paralyzed by fear and doubt on the battlefield, not because he is weak, but because he is torn between societal expectations and his deeper calling. Krishna, as his guide, reminds him that abandoning his nature is a betrayal of the self. In this tradition, wasting life is not about being idle, but about not living from the truth of who you are. In Sufi mysticism, life is seen as a journey of remembrance, of returning to the divine spark within. The Sufi poet Rumi wrote often about those who are asleep while awake, whose lives are spent in distraction rather than devotion. The Sufis spoke of the nafs, the ego self, which keeps the soul trapped in repetitive patterns away from its essence. To waste life, in their view, was to forget this divine identity, to mistake the shadow for the substance. And in Christianity, particularly in early monastic traditions, wasting life was tied to a concept called acedia, a spiritual lethargy, a kind of soul-level boredom or despair. The Desert Fathers warned that acedia was not just laziness, but a quiet rejection of one's purpose, a turning away from the sacred work of becoming. Fast forward to the Enlightenment, and we begin to see the rise of rationalism and individualism. The idea of wasting one's life begins to take on more personal, secular meanings. Thinkers like John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau emphasize the importance of freedom, experience, and self-realization. Life in this framework becomes a project, something to shape and direct with reason and will. But even as societies became more modern, the existential ache remained. In the 19th and 20th centuries, philosophers like Søren Kierkegaard and Friedrich Nietzsche addressed the dread of not living authentically. Kierkegaard described the despair of living in the aesthetic, where people chase pleasure and distractions to avoid facing their inner void. Nietzsche warned of the herd mentality, people forfeiting their uniqueness in favor of social comfort. Both saw wasted life not as a lack of activity, but as a failure to confront the truth of one's own existence. Then came Carl Jung. Unlike Freud, who focused on pathology and repression, Jung was fascinated by wholeness. He saw life as a journey toward individuation, the integration of all parts of the psyche into a cohesive, conscious self. For Jung, the real danger was not neurosis or anxiety. It was a life unlived, a person who never confronts their shadow, never follows their inner images, never brings the unconscious into awareness. Jung believed that many people suffer not from mental illness, but from a meaning crisis. They are outwardly functioning, but inwardly fractured. They have ignored their inner voice for so long that they no longer recognize it. In a letter, Jung once wrote, "What did you do as a child that made the hours pass like minutes? Herein lies the key to your earthly pursuits." He understood that our deepest truth is often hidden in the most innocent memories, what once lit us up before the world told us to be realistic. In today's world, the pressure to perform, to accumulate, to optimize, has turned life into a race with no finish line. Productivity has become a virtue. Stillness feels like guilt. Even leisure is often a performance, and beneath it all, the same quiet fear lingers. What if I am living the wrong life? What has changed across history is the language, the technologies, the roles we play. But what has not changed is the human longing to feel alive in one's own existence, to wake up, to matter, to create, to belong to something larger than fear. Whether through religion, myth, philosophy, or psychology, every culture has tried to answer the same question. What is a life well lived? And perhaps more hauntingly, what happens when we do not live it? Understanding this history reminds us that we are not alone in this struggle. and that the ache you may feel, the one that says there is more, that something is missing, is not a flaw. It is a compass. It is a part of you that refuses to sleep through the miracle of your own existence. Carl Jung did not offer quick fixes. He invited us into a lifelong dialogue with the self, into dreams, symbols, archetypes, and shadows, into the mystery of why we are here at all. He believed that the task of a lifetime is not to be successful in the world's terms, but to be whole, to make peace with the many selves inside you, to walk the path that is truly yours. And perhaps this is how we begin to stop wasting our lives, not by doing more, but by remembering more. Remembering who we are, where we came from, and what we are here to become. To understand how and why so many of us waste our lives, despite good intentions, education, and awareness, we need to look inward, not just spiritually, but psychologically. The human mind is not a passive mirror of reality. It is an active interpreter, and often the ways it interprets the world are shaped by forces we do not consciously control. Carl Jung believed that every person carries within them not just their own personal history, but the entire history of the human species. He called this the collective unconscious, a psychic inheritance of images, instincts, and patterns that show up again and again in dreams, myths, stories, and behaviors. Within this unconscious live the archetypes, universal figures like the hero, the mother, the trickster, the sage. These are not characters but living structures of the psyche. They guide us, speak through us, and sometimes trap us. When we live unconsciously, when we ignore our dreams, suppress our emotions, or conform blindly to society, we are often being ruled by these archetypes without even realizing it. Jung warned that what we do not bring into consciousness appears in our lives as fate. In other words, if we refuse to know ourselves, life begins to feel like something happening to us, rather than something we are actively shaping. This is where modern psychology meets ancient wisdom. Many traditions have echoed the same truth in different languages. The Sufis speak of polishing the heart until it becomes a mirror, capable of reflecting the divine. Jung spoke of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming whole. Both paths require us to face our shadows. The shadow in Jungian psychology refers to the parts of ourselves we have rejected or disowned. These can be qualities we find unacceptable: anger, selfishness, desire, but also positive traits we never developed, like confidence, creativity, or power. These parts do not disappear. They live underground, influencing our decisions, reactions, and relationships. They show up in envy, resentment, addiction, and projection. Many people waste their lives not because they lack discipline or motivation, but because they are at war with themselves. They are trying to succeed while secretly believing they do not deserve it. They are chasing love while pushing it away. They are building a life that looks good on the outside but feels hollow within. The shadow is not evil. It is unintegrated, and integrating it is not easy. But it is necessary if we are to live with depth and direction. Another concept worth exploring is ego. In both spiritual and psychological traditions, the ego is a complex thing. In Jung's framework, the ego is the center of our conscious identity, the I we know ourselves to be. It is not inherently bad, but problems arise when the ego tries to dominate the entire psyche. When we believe we are only our resume, our roles, or our social media profile, we shrink ourselves down to a fraction of what we truly are. The ego resists change. It fears the unknown, and often what we call wasting time is really a kind of psychic defense, staying stuck because moving forward would mean confronting uncertainty, grief, or vulnerability. It is easier to stay busy than to be still, easier to scroll than to sit with ourselves. Modern psychology has added further layers to this. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, for example, has shown how distorted thinking patterns, like all-or-nothing thinking, catastrophizing, or self-blame, can keep us trapped in cycles of avoidance and regret. These patterns often originate in early experiences, moments when we were shamed, ignored, or forced to adapt in ways that denied our true nature. Attachment theory adds another dimension. It suggests that the way we relate to others in adulthood, whether we fear abandonment, avoid intimacy, or crave constant reassurance, is shaped by our earliest relationships. A person who was not seen or valued as a child may grow into an adult who never feels enough. And from that wound, they may overwork, overgive, or numb themselves, never quite touching the life they are meant to live. Socially, we are also up against powerful forces. In a hyper-capitalist, media-saturated world, we are constantly told who we should be. Algorithms feed us curated images of other people's lives, making ours feel dull by comparison. Advertising exploits our insecurities, promising meaning through consumption. Even the wellness industry at times sells self-improvement as another form of performance. We are praised for productivity, not presence, for ambition, not introspection, for being visible, not being wise. But wisdom is precisely what we need, and this is where Jung becomes especially relevant. Jung believed that we cannot fix ourselves the way we fix machines. The psyche is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be engaged. He viewed psychological symptoms, like anxiety, depression, or burnout, not as failures, but as messages. Signals that we are out of alignment, that something vital has been ignored. He also believed that the unconscious is not just a basement of repressed pain, but a treasure house of untapped potential. Within our dreams, intuitions, and creative impulses live clues to the life we are meant to live. But most of us were never taught how to listen. In ancient cultures, dreams were considered sacred. Shamans, mystics, and elders were dream interpreters. Jung wanted to bring this back, not as superstition, but as psychology. He believed that every person has an inner guide, a kind of mythic map, if only they are willing to look within. To stop wasting our lives, then, is not to become perfect, but to become aware. To live not from fear or habit, but from inner authority. This takes time. It takes reflection, and it often requires unlearning what we were taught about success, identity, and worth. But when you begin to walk this path, even a little, you start to feel something shift. Your decisions become more intentional. Your relationships deepen. Your days feel less like items on a checklist and more like pieces of a puzzle that slowly begins to make sense. Jung once said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens." So let us awaken. Let us stop measuring our worth by speed, status, or likes. Let us become people who ask better questions. Who am I beneath the noise? What calls to me from the silence? What part of me have I left behind, and how can I bring it home? The answers will not come all at once, but asking the questions is the beginning, and, for many, that is the moment when life truly begins. There is an ancient story echoing across time that speaks to the experience of a wasted life. It is the story of the Wasteland. In the Arthurian legends, the kingdom of Camelot falls into ruin. The rivers dry up. The crops wither. The people lose hope. The land itself is sick, barren, lifeless. And at the center of this decay is the Fisher King, a wounded monarch, cursed and immobile, sitting by a lake that no longer nourishes. His wound, unhealed and unspoken, is the source of the land's suffering. But the story does not end there. The wasteland is not permanent. There is a cure, but it does not come from power, strength, or conquest. It comes from a question. A single, sincere question asked by a young knight named Parsifal. What ails you? That's it. No sword, no spell, just presence, compassion, the willingness to witness suffering without turning away. Jung loved this myth. He saw in it the archetypal pattern of modern life, the outward success hiding an inner emptiness, the soul's hunger buried beneath a culture of distraction and denial. The Wasteland, for Jung, was not just a story. It was the unconscious world of the modern individual, desolate because it had been forgotten. And the Fisher King? That was each of us, at some point in our lives, wounded, isolated, living by a stagnant pool of potential. When we talk about wasting our lives, we are often speaking from the wasteland. So how do we find the Grail? How do we revive the inner world that feels dried out and barren? Jung's answer was not to chase some external salvation. It was to return to the inner realm, to descend, gently and courageously, into the psyche, to bring attention to what has been exiled, to ask the hard questions. What ails me? Where have I been wounded? Where did I stop trusting life? Modern life does not teach us to ask these questions. It teaches us to optimize, to hustle, to self-improve. But the soul is not a machine. It does not want to be fixed. It wants to be seen. This is why the mythic frame still matters, because the wasteland is not just personal, it is cultural. We live in a time of extreme stimulation but profound disconnection. Information is abundant, but wisdom is rare. We can access the world through our screens, but many of us cannot access ourselves. This, too, is a form of soul loss, a condition Jung called psychic dissociation, when the conscious self is split off from the deeper, instinctual layers of being. And in this condition, life feels wasted not because we are doing nothing, but because we are doing the wrong things, for the wrong reasons, without ever pausing to ask why. The question is no longer, are you busy? The question is, are you whole? To return from the wasteland is to begin living from the center again. Not the ego, not the mask, but the soul. This is not always dramatic. It often begins with small acts of self-trust, saying no to what drains you, saying yes to what nourishes you, even if it scares you. Turning off the noise long enough to hear your own voice. Creating art, even badly, simply because it feels alive. Listening to your dreams, your emotions, your body. Each of these is a step toward reanimation. And here's the beautiful truth Jung pointed out. The psyche wants to heal. It is always trying to integrate, to become whole. But it needs your participation. It needs your presence. Jung called this the self. Not the ego, but the deeper organizing principle of the psyche, the part of you that seeks growth, meaning, and balance. When you align with the self, your life may not become easier, but it becomes more real, more yours. This is the Grail. Not a cup, not a treasure, but a way of being in the world that feels congruent, true, rooted. To get there, you will have to leave the shallow waters. You will have to let go of other people's maps and begin drawing your own. You will have to grieve the time you lost, but without staying stuck in shame. You will have to forgive yourself for not knowing earlier. And then choose again. There will be resistance. There always is. The world will pull you back toward the surface. You'll be told to be reasonable, to follow the rules, to stick with what's safe, but the soul does not thrive on safety. It thrives on truth. Jung once said, "In each of us there is another whom we do not know." He speaks to us in dreams and tells us how differently he sees us from how we see ourselves. The work is to begin that dialogue, to let that inner voice speak again, to trust that even if the path looks strange, it is still yours. So ask yourself, where is my inner wasteland? What wound have I been circling but not tending? What is the one truth I have been too afraid to say? You may not have all the answers. That is okay. The power is in the asking. The healing begins not with knowing, but with noticing. You are Parsifal, seeking your Grail. You are the Fisher King waiting to be seen. You are the wasteland, and the spring that can return. Your life is not wasted, but it is waiting. Not for more accomplishments, not for more productivity, but for more presence. So, slow down. Breathe. Ask the question, what ails you? Let that be the beginning of your return. There is a quiet kind of suffering that comes not from tragedy, but from disconnection. Not a dramatic collapse, but a slow erosion. This is the suffering of the unlived life. And while it may not always be visible from the outside, it shows itself in tension, in confusion, in regret, and in the aching sense that something is missing. Carl Jung observed that many of the people who came to him for help were not ill in the medical sense. They were successful, educated, externally functional, but inside they were lost. He called this loss a neurosis of meaning. People were not dying. They were drifting, not starving for food, but for direction, depth, and inner connection. One of the most painful consequences of wasting one's life is the feeling of inner division. You may find yourself living two lives, the one that plays out in the world and the one that stays locked inside. Outwardly, you go through the motions, smiling, working, posting, showing up, but inwardly, you feel like a stranger to yourself. You know you're not where you're meant to be, but you don't know how to change course without burning it all down. This disconnect doesn't just affect your mental health, it seeps into your relationships. When you are out of alignment with yourself, you tend to attract or tolerate relationships that mirror that same disconnection. You may settle for shallow connections because the deeper ones require vulnerability you are not ready to face. You may overgive to others to avoid the silence of your own needs. Or you may isolate entirely, thinking no one would understand. Carl Jung believed that unintegrated parts of ourselves do not simply disappear. They return through projection. If you have denied your ambition, you might envy those who succeed. If you've buried your anger, you might attract partners who express it for you. If you've silenced your creativity, you might become overly critical of those who dare to express theirs. What we do not own within ourselves, we unconsciously cast onto the world. And so, the consequence of living an unconscious life is not just emptiness, it's distortion. We start seeing through foggy glass. We misinterpret people's intentions. We mistake fear for intuition. We sabotage opportunities because they threaten our self-image. Over time, the gap between who we are and who we pretend to be becomes too wide to ignore. This psychological strain often shows up physically. The body keeps score. Chronic fatigue, tension, headaches, insomnia, these are sometimes signals that we are not living in a way that nourishes us. Burnout, for example, is not always about overwork. Sometimes it is the result of doing too much of what drains you and not enough of what fills you. There are also social consequences to this pattern. When large groups of people live disconnected from meaning, a culture of numbness emerges. We become more susceptible to manipulation, advertising, shallow entertainment. We overconsume to compensate for underliving. Attention spans shorten. Purpose is replaced by performance, and a society built on appearances begins to crumble beneath the weight of its own emptiness. History offers us countless examples of this phenomenon. In Greek mythology, there is the tragic figure of Sisyphus, condemned to push a boulder up a hill for eternity, only to watch it roll back down. He is often interpreted as a symbol of meaningless labor, but what makes his suffering especially profound is not the task itself. It is the absence of why. Without meaning, even effort becomes torment. In the Sufi tradition, there is the story of the man searching for his key under a street lamp. When asked where he lost it, he points to a dark alley. "Then why are you looking here?" someone asks. "Because the light is better," he says. This is the nature of misdirected energy. We spend years searching for fulfillment in the places that are lit by external validation, money, status, approval, when the real treasure lies in the darker, quieter places within us. Even in modern times, you can see this echoed in the lives of many who make it by society's standards, only to admit later that they felt hollow, burnt out, unfulfilled. Success without alignment is not success. It is often just another mask. And for many, the most haunting consequence of all is regret. Not the kind that comes from making a wrong choice, but from never choosing at all. From waiting too long. From being too afraid. From listening to everyone else but your own soul. Jung once wrote that nothing has a stronger influence on the child than the unlived life of the parent. This points to another ripple effect: generational disconnection. When one generation silences its authenticity, the next often inherits the confusion. Children grow up absorbing unspoken sadness, unexpressed dreams, and unhealed wounds. And so, the cycle repeats unless someone decides to break it. But this does not mean we are doomed. These consequences are not punishments. They are invitations. Invitations to stop, to listen, to turn inward, to ask, where have I been on autopilot? What part of me have I left behind? What life is waiting for me beneath the one I've built? It's important to approach this not with shame, but with compassion. We waste time for a reason. Sometimes we are in survival mode. Sometimes we are protecting old wounds. Sometimes we simply do not yet have the tools or awareness to choose differently. This is not a flaw, it is a phase. But at some point we are asked to wake up. And that moment of awakening can be quiet. It doesn't have to look like a dramatic change. It can be as simple as pausing before a decision and asking, is this mine, or is this inherited? Is this what I want, or what I was told to want? Realignment often begins with small acts of honesty. Saying no when you mean no. Spending an hour on something you love, even if it's unproductive. Reaching out to someone with sincerity, not performance. Writing down the dreams you've buried. Letting yourself grieve the time lost. Not as self-punishment, but as a form of love. Because the truth is, the life you long for is not in some far-off future. It is here, beneath the noise, within reach, but only if you are willing to meet yourself where you are. Carl Jung believed that life has a way of bringing us back to ourselves, through pain, through dreams, through crisis, not to punish, but to guide. What feels like breakdown is often the beginning of breakthrough, and what feels like a wasted life can still become a sacred one, if we are willing to look inward and begin again. So ask yourself gently, without judgment, where am I not fully alive? Let the answer come not from guilt, but from curiosity. Let it be a doorway, and walk through it, step by step, breath by breath, toward the life that still wants to be lived. You do not need to burn your life down to begin living more fully. You only need to start listening, really listening, to yourself. The journey from a life half-lived to one rich with meaning does not begin with a leap, but with a turn, a quiet turn inward. Carl Jung believed that the path to wholeness was not linear. It is spiral-shaped. We circle around our wounds, our dreams, our identities, again and again, each time seeing a little more, understanding a little deeper, becoming a little more ourselves. He called this process individuation. It is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming real. And realness requires integration. So how do we begin this process? How do we stop wasting our lives, not in theory, but in practice? Let's begin with the most overlooked but most powerful tool we have: attention. Practice inner attention. In a world addicted to distraction, paying attention to your own inner life is revolutionary. Begin by carving out small moments to simply be present with yourself. This could be through journaling, meditation, or even a few minutes of silence at the beginning or end of your day. Try this. At night, instead of reaching for your phone, ask yourself, what did I truly feel today? What did I ignore? What did I need? You might be surprised by what surfaces. Jung often used dream work as a tool to access the unconscious. You do not need to be an expert to start this. Keep a dream journal beside your bed. Upon waking, jot down whatever images or emotions you recall. Over time, you will notice patterns, symbols from your psyche trying to speak. Integrate the shadow. The parts of you that you avoid, the anger, the envy, the fear, the desire, do not go away when you ignore them. They grow stronger. Jung encouraged people to make their shadows conscious, not to indulge them, but to reclaim the energy trapped there. Start by noticing when you react strongly to someone. Ask yourself, what part of me is being triggered? What have I disowned that this person represents? You can also journal with prompts like, what traits in others deeply annoy me, and why? What am I afraid others would say if they truly knew me? When was the last time I said yes when I meant no? Be gentle. Shadow work is not self-judgment. It is self-retrieval. Build a relationship with your inner authority. We waste years seeking permission from parents, teachers, society, before doing what our soul already knows is right. The antidote is to start building a relationship with your inner voice. This does not mean rejecting all outside input. It means holding external opinions lightly and learning to discern your truth beneath the noise. Practice this. When making a decision, pause. Close your eyes. Ask, if I wasn't afraid, what would I choose? Or, if no one else could see or judge me, what would I do? Listen. Even if you cannot act on the answer yet, let it be acknowledged. Reclaim the body. The body is often where we feel our disconnection most acutely. When we are misaligned, it shows up in the gut, the shoulders, the breath. To come back to ourselves, we must come back to the body. You do not need to become a yogi. Simply begin noticing your body in moments of decision, emotion, or silence. Is your chest tight? Your jaw clenched? Are you breathing? Try somatic journaling. Ask your body, where am I holding tension? What would this part say if it had a voice? What does it need? This kind of embodied awareness brings intuition back online. It roots your decisions in truth, not fear. Reframe productivity. A major reason we feel our lives are wasted is because we measure them with the wrong metrics. Our culture has taught us to value doing over being, output over insight. But meaning cannot be measured in likes, salary, or speed. Redefine productivity for yourself. Ask, did I listen to my needs today? Did I move closer to something that matters to me, even slightly? Did I speak or act from alignment, even once? These are the seeds of an authentic life. Use archetypal practices. Jung's concept of archetypes can become a living practice. If you feel stuck in one role, such as caretaker, achiever, or rebel, experiment with embodying another. If you're always giving, explore the warrior, the part of you that sets boundaries and protects. If you've been disconnected from play, invite the child or trickster to express, through art, movement, or spontaneity. If you've been silenced, journal from the sage within. Let that voice speak truth without apology. These are not games. They are sacred invitations to become more whole. Create a ritual of reflection. All traditions, ancient and modern, honor the power of reflection. Whether it's Sufi whirling, Christian contemplation, or Buddhist meditation, the act of pausing and turning inward is universally recognized as essential for a meaningful life. Build your own version. Each week, ask yourself, what gave me energy this week? What drained me? What did I avoid that needs facing? Where did I feel most alive? Let your answers guide the next week, not in rigid goal setting, but in gentle realignment. Seek mirrors, not masters. No one can live your life for you, but wise companions can help you see more clearly. Whether it's a therapist, a mentor, or a friend who truly listens, find those who reflect your essence, not their projections. Therapeutic modalities like Jungian analysis, internal family systems, IFS, or depth psychology can be especially helpful. But even outside formal therapy, seek conversations that nourish your soul, not ones that drain it. Honor the small, sacred steps. Not every transformation needs to look like a breakthrough. In fact, most do not. True change often begins in the mundane, in choosing water over distraction, honesty over politeness, a walk over a scroll. Your life changes when your choices align with your soul, even if only once a day. Carl Jung wrote, "We don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This is the work, not perfection, but integration, not performance, but presence." So here is a practice to begin today. At the end of the day, sit in stillness. Place a hand on your heart. Ask, did I abandon myself today? Or did I return, if only for a moment? Let this be your compass. Let this be your practice. Let this be how you stop wasting your life. Not by racing toward some distant purpose, but by reclaiming the purpose that already lives in you. There is a moment, quiet, tender, and often private, when you realize that the life you have been living is not the life you were meant to live. It may not come with fireworks or breakdowns. Sometimes it arrives in a whisper, a question, a pause at a red light, a sleepless night, a faint, persistent ache that says, something is missing. That moment is not your failure. It is your invitation. Carl Jung taught that the soul does not shout. It does not demand. It waits, patiently, sometimes for years, until you are ready to hear it, until the life you have been performing becomes too heavy to carry, until you become willing to trade the comfort of familiarity for the risk of becoming real. So, what does it mean to stop wasting your life? It does not mean climbing every mountain, quitting your job, or achieving something grand by society's standards. It means living in such a way that you are in conversation with your own depth. It means your choices reflect who you are, not who you were told to be. It means you are awake, aware, and willing to respond to what life asks of you. To stop wasting your life is to stop abandoning yourself. And this journey is not only personal, it is also ancestral, historical, spiritual. Throughout time, people have sought this same alignment, from the mystics of the East to the philosophers of the West, from ancient myths to modern therapy rooms. The desire to live a meaningful life, one that is inwardly true and outwardly expressed, is universal. We are not the first to ask these questions. We are not the first to lose our way, and we will not be the last to return home. There is a kind of grace that arrives when you realize that you do not have to live in extremes. You do not have to fix everything overnight. You only need to take one honest step, and then another, and then another. This is how you begin again. Not by rewriting your past, but by reclaiming your present. Jung believed that every life is a story, written moment by moment, and that most people, tragically, die having never read their own. They live by someone else's script, follow someone else's dream, carry someone else's guilt. But the story, the real story, still lives beneath it all, waiting for its author to return. So if you feel lost, that is not the end of your story. That is where it begins. That is where the unconscious becomes conscious, where the shadow becomes teacher, where the wound becomes wisdom. This work is not easy. It asks everything of you. Your attention, your courage, your honesty. But what you gain is not just a better life, it is a truer one, and that is worth everything. As you move forward, remember this. You will never feel completely ready. You will never have absolute certainty. You will always find a reason to delay. But your life is not a rehearsal. It is unfolding now, in every small act of alignment, in every honest word, in every moment you choose to return to yourself instead of drifting further away. There is still time. Time to begin. Time to choose. Time to become. So pause. Breathe. Listen. Ask yourself, what part of me have I ignored for too long? What truth have I buried beneath shoulds and fears? What would it look like to live from that truth, even a little? Let those answers guide you. And as you walk this path, know that you are not alone. We all have unlived lives. We all forget. We all wander. But we can remember. We can return. We can live, not someday, not ideally, but truly, right here, right now, one step at a time. If you're still here, still listening, then something in this spoke to you. Maybe it wasn't loud, maybe it was quiet, subtle, like a truth you had forgotten but never stopped feeling. That quiet voice inside you, it matters. It is the beginning of everything. And this space, this channel, is here to honor that voice, to hold space for the parts of you that want more than surface answers, the parts that seek depth, clarity, and real transformation. We live in a world that moves fast, that rewards speed over sincerity, appearances over essence. But if you're someone who hungers for something deeper, for insight that challenges, for stories that awaken, for practices that heal, then you are in the right place. Here, we do not chase perfection. We walk the spiral path. Together, with honesty, with self-awareness, with curiosity. We learn from psychology, from history, from the great thinkers and mystics who walked this path before us. Carl Jung, yes, but also Rumi, Marcus Aurelius, Nietzsche, and the unnamed souls whose stories echo through time. This is not content for passive consumption. It is a call to remember, to reclaim, to reflect, and to rise. So if something stirred in you today, some realization, some emotion, some unspoken desire to live more truthfully, stay with it. Journal about it. Sit with it. Share it with someone. Let it move you. And if you're ready to keep walking this path, I invite you to subscribe. Not because of algorithms or numbers, but because there is power in choosing what you feed your mind and soul. When you subscribe, you're not just following a channel, you're joining a community. One grounded in emotional intelligence, inner work, and meaningful growth. We're not here to perform. We're here to become. Thoughtfully, purposefully, together. So take a breath. Feel that quiet pull inside you. And if it's time, say yes to the journey. The life that's waiting for you, the one that feels like yours, starts now.